Well, most of us we talk about distributed systems. I'm particularly going to talk about failures, and when they fail, they usually don't make a sound. So this is a long joke that me and my friend Aditya had. Like we belong to an era when things used to fail in computers, and they would make a sound. So now, which one of this would break and make a sound? Would this make a sound? Yeah. I don't hear much response. Yeah, cool. Would this make a sound? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes? So, would this make a sound? Would it? I mean, it's a sonic burst, right? Like it's faster than speed of sound. How would it make a sound? Yeah, so anyway. Would this make a sound when it breaks? Yes? What does that sound like? Like, does anybody know what it sounds like when it breaks? Like, okay. Would this make a sound when it breaks? How many of you actually have seen this one making a sound when it breaks? Oh, cool. Okay, one guy. Any other one? Like, this is just a standard BIOS. Would they make a sound when it breaks? Oh, that is a law, humanity's biggest question. When a tree falls in a forest, nobody heard it, did it make a sound? Anyway, so I'm going to walk you guys around some of the pages that I got when I was on call. And how did we react to those situations? And when I look back, I'm quite ashamed of the reactions. Things would have been done better. And what did I actually learn? What common knowledge tells that, hey, this is a failure. I want to go deeper down and understand why and how did it fail. More importantly, what could I do to avoid that situation from happening the next time on? Usually when we look at RCAs, we look at failures, we say, fine, just fix this thing. But what's deeper underneath that? Because if we don't fix the root cause of the problem, it's going to happen again, if not here, somewhere else. Failures usually happen in these kinds, like software failures, easy to detect. You got your test cases, you got your CI/CD, fairly easy to detect, you can do it. The other ones are the ones which actually cause trouble. Human failures. What do? Do we replace humans? Well, usually it's expensive to replace humans. Network, they fail all the time. Processes and culture. And when we look at an RC and we say that, hey, something failed, usually more often than not, we are actually just talking about a software fix. That, hey, fix this. But the remainder of the 4 points are the ones that actually cause more and more recurring problems. And those are the ones that I want to focus at. Well, you're still at the right conference, it's still about software. So, outage number 1. Customer service reports, login is down. Standard drill, check everything, nothing looks broken. Like, Datadog's fine, Papertrail's fine, New Relic's fine, tracing, server, load, error, everything looks okay. You wanna guess what could be broken here? Anybody? Like, if you were on call, what would you think now? Like, I gave you all the inputs, right? Nothing's broken here. Anybody wants to take a wild guess, please feel free to. Wrong password? Actually good one, yeah. No, but a lot of people were complaining that on Twitter, that it's down. So, people make a lot of sound on Twitter, your software doesn't. So, what happened was somebody had just altered a 443 group rule. And went through, everything looks down. Here, things that I want you to pay attention to. Now, because of this, actually everything was down. It was not just that the login was down. But what was being reported was login was down. Most of the times these errors actually send us on a wild goose chase. We're looking somewhere else, but the error is somewhere else. Now, could have gone detected. How would you fix this? What is this? Like, what does this tell you, this failure, when you look at this? Right. In hindsight, yes, it made sense. This CloudTrail as well. But in reality, is this a thing that you even pay attention to and say that, of all the things in my system, let me just go look at AWS rules and see if somebody changes that. Well, eventually that's how we found it. But what's the real root cause here? Exactly. This basically reveals deeper problem. Well, first of all, it tells me we are doing things manually. All of this should be automated. There's no reason why somebody should actually go in. Like, it's okay even if somebody has to, because, usually we say, nobody should have permission. Well, somebody has to have permission at the end of the day. It could have been me at the end of it. I mean, you don't know whether it was me or not, but it could have been me. So, but what's required here is you need to automate this process, because today it's 443, tomorrow it could be a disk. Another day it could be a route 53 configuration as well. And these things will keep happening if you don't fix them. Okay, next one. Another outage. Easier one, customer reports not able to delete profile. Well, they should not be able to delete profile, but they report that you're not able to delete profile, check everything. Elasticsearch, Datadog, New Relic, tracing server, load error, everything looks fine. Again, same story. And this time around it's not 443, because only delete is not working. So, want to take a wild guess at what could be wrong? And see, I mean, I'm putting you on shoes here. Like, you are on call with me right now. What do you think? Suggest me. What should I go look at? Like, I've checked everything, that monitoring, observability, everything, like all the fancy words you want to say, it's all there. Meanwhile, on Twitter, I don't know if this guy's here actually. I cut out his photo. I don't know, I attribute it to him. So, so what happened was, Jio, they started blocking delete calls on traffic. So delete wasn't working. And only delete wasn't working. What's the fix for it? Straight simple, right? Make it HTTPS. That's what we did. I mean, you make it HTTPS and it starts working. But what's the real problem here? If you think of it. Well, how did something launch on HTTP? That's the first thing. Usually when things fail, the first thing that I always ask is, and it hits me in epiphany there. One, how was it working so far? Two, what else is breaking? Like, I get this. This is fix that we'll do instantly. So a lot of time when I meet people, I say, how long does it take for you to fix problem? And they say, just takes a couple of minutes and we fix production issue. No. How long does it take for you to find the issue? That's the real question. So over here, what we are saying is that there is a possibility that if I make this service HTTPS right now, tomorrow somebody is going to launch another service. That's going to be HTTP. This is going to keep happening unless and until we actually build some automation toolchain around it. What it does is it has to go through every single endpoint of mine. Start all the way from my Route 53. Take all my domains. Find all my load balancers. Then actually go make a recursive ping every single minute, every single hour, so that this doesn't happen. So the fix is not just make this HTTPS. The fix is that we have to eradicate this problem or any similar problem from happening again. What is interesting is, at the same time, the same day, Air India actually launched a disclaimer. And because their site was also being spoofed, so they said, the original one is this one, the fake ones are these ones, please do not use them. And interestingly enough, the disclaimer was also on HTTP site. So that's the URL there. So, standard questions, right? I always ask, how was it working so far? What else is breaking? And there's no way to find these answers most of the times. Outage number 3, this is going to be a long one. 7:30 a.m., 25 hours before a country launch, our pager duty goes off. Elasticsearch goes in, we see 500. So this time around there's some noise. There's some 500 that we're seeing, that there's errors happening. And logs are coming in. The interesting thing about logs is, when everything is working, logs don't come in. But when something fails, they just come in such a flurry that you can't even debug it. And with a system where there are too many components and too many processes, they come in a large volume. So there's literally no way that I could actually just look at a log screen and say that, hey, this is an error. So one of us thought that, we should start copying the logs, which was, this actually gave in, and this was one of the best things that somebody did. That guy's here. A few minutes later, 500 stop, pager duty is auto-resolved. And we think, oh, fine, well, problem came in, problem goes back. Like, so it happened, I don't know why. Well, 100 other things that are unexplained. 5 minutes into it, pager duty goes off again. Now the public API is unreachable. And this is repeating. So actually I have not mentioned it because it becomes nonsensical on the slide. Pager duty stops again. Another pager duty comes in. So it's on and on, like pager duty goes off. We see that, 500s are there. then it goes off again, website goes down, comes back again, everything happening. And we said, that, yeah, it looks good to me, fix it. Most of the time we say this, looks good to me. We check, is there a new deployment? There isn't. We check, is the firewall down? No, nothing. Unexplained reasons, like, I don't know why it's failing. We check Grafana, check stack driver, everything, nothing gives in that why could it be failing. Now, in the meanwhile, obviously, we had downloaded the logs, and one of the search scripts tell us that there is a database error on some requests. This starts giving in that, hey, this something could be going wrong here. 20 hours later, this actually goes on for 20 hours, and we called everybody. I called my mom, dad, everybody's in SRE that day. Everybody goes through the system, sees what's wrong, nobody could find it. 20 hours later, what we realized was, one of the machines, so what was happening was, so we used to mount a loopback device. And this mounting of a loopback device was backed by a network component as well. So this was done to actually speed up the write. So we would first write to a loopback device, which is actually backed by another process, which is syncing it as a cluster on the network. And we realized there was a bug here. And the bug was that the mount device was not being remounted on a reboot. So what that meant was that the device would not come back. And this bug was fixed. But it was fixed on a few machines, but not one machine. And that one machine was brought into circulation. And that one machine was brought into circulation. It didn't have that particular fix. So it had everything, but it didn't have that fix. And one of the DB shards actually went on that machine. And the machine got rebooted because it was rebooting. And when it rebooted, the master went back somewhere else. But the data that was actually being written during that time, that was lost. And how this led to a cascading failure was, the UAT guys, when they were performing a UAT, their data was the only one which was actually missing. So our health checks would work. So how this goes on as cascading. They would send a request, they're performing UAT before the launch, they would send in request, 500s happen, obviously data is not found, it results in error. The load balancer disconnects it. A few minutes later, we feel like, yeah, node looks okay, restart the process, send health request, everything is fine, put the node back into circulation, PagerDuty is resolved. They send the request again, the same request fail again, so that was the process. Now, at the end of it, data was lost as well. Now, luckily, this was just UAT data. It wasn't production data. And if it would have been a bigger crisis. But what does this tell? If I was to ask you, how would you actually prevent this? Like, we got the fix. That fine, it's just one command that I have to run right now. But how would I eliminate this problem from ever happening again? So what's the real cause behind it? Like, is it a human error? Should I fire all those people? People are going to make mistakes. If not this, another one. There are 4 more RCAs. They're going to perform the same mistakes again. Now, this is not even a culture problem. What is this? So, over here, now when I look back, all I needed was a simple process. What it does is, it just validates a configuration at start of a machine. And now this is something that we had to build later, and we did. Because, if this is not a problem, there's going to be another problem about heterogeneity of systems. Systems have to be homogeneous before you can claim that, hey, while this works on my machine, this is going to work on production as well. Every machine has to look as alike as possible. Now, I understand that creating environments which look completely alike is almost impossible. And there are always going to be issues of some disk being of different quality, some RAM being of different quality, or some processor being of different quality as well. But as much as possible, we have to eliminate this, because this RCA doesn't tell me that this is broken. Fine, I'm looking beyond this. This RCA tells me that subsequently also, there could be multiple such failures which will happen if I do not guarantee that a command is being homogeneously run across all my machines. And answer is not Ansible. Answer is not Chef here. Let's see how that fails as well, right? Let's say all of these machines were backed by, they were being done by Ansible. It's not that we were actually running these manually. Let's take a simple case, right? Ansible uses service discovery to ensure that I have to run this command on 19 nodes. The 20th node is not there. When the 20th node comes back, Ansible can't do much about it. I mean, you have to still run Ansible. I mean, there's only so much that our software would do in its own state. We still need to write these orchestrators on top. And this is a real problem that we had to chase. And beyond that point, we actually made it sure that what we did was we ran OS query later onwards to ensure that every machine at restart would look the same. What we would do is we would periodically run scans of everything almost every day to ensure the state looks the same as well, because such failures have to be avoided. Outage number 4. Multiple jobs run despite a distributed lock. A lock failure doesn't look like this in systems. It actually runs like this. So what we were doing was we would run Terraform, and in Terraform what happens is people can actually dispatch infrastructure from your own machines. Very powerful tool, but powerful also means that multiple people can change the same thing, and it would result in either failures, conflicting resources, unpredictable states, right? Just like I usually give this example in other talks as well. There's a variable x equal to 1, there are two processes, parallel processes. One is trying to do a multiply by 2, the other is trying to do a addition of 2. What would the outcome state be? Well, nobody knows. It could be 1, 2, 3, anything. I mean, all processes could fail, none could fail. You can't tell the order of it as well. So we had written a piece of software. What it does is it acquires a lock before an operation happens. So user A wants to perform a Terraform apply, it would grant it a lock. And the other guy would try to do it, the lock is there, so it would fail it. Standard stuff, this is how we do it. We tried to act slightly smarter, and we're like, the new age, let's start using etcd as well. So we're using etcd. And I mean, there were other reasons of using etcd, because it was there in the cluster for service discovery as well. Now, ideal behavior of what a lock looks like. You make a call, you provide value equal to 1. Now, if the previous value was 1 and I try to make it to 2, it will allow this. This is standard compare and swap algorithm, and etcd has a native API for this as well. But that's on the left. On the right is where I'm trying to show what it fails like. So in a compare and swap algorithm, if the original value was not the same, then it would not allow you to change it. So what this means is that if process A is trying to change it, it adds its own value, it gets it. When process B tries to do it, because the original value is not the same, it would fail. So that's how etcd you would actually put in a lock. Now on top of this, we have a TTL as well. So every key had a TTL to it. What that means is time to live. Every 5 minutes, the key would get evicted. And that is usually the amount of time that we would take, as this is what it takes like to do an operation. Because the problem with locks in distributed systems is that you could lock it forever, or you could lock it for a short amount of time. And there's no answer to find this out. I mean, there's no way that you can actually, so usually the one who is locking has the onus of unlocking. I mean, that's what we've been taught using semaphores and all those books as well. But what if the process who took the lock died? Right? The lock would be there forever, because the onus of unlocking was on a process which was taking forever. So obviously unlock would not happen as well. Now, how would you unlock it? So usually a safe way to do this is there's a TTL condition that you add, that this is a maximum permissible time for which I'll take a lock. And beyond this point, let the system fail if it has to. I mean, at some point, somebody will have to come in and clean up the thing. Now, default starts with a key equal to stopped. Both processes start, and they try to take a lock with pre-value. Only one should win. This is the ideal implementation. Run A requires a CAS lock with key TTL. It gets it. A tries to now update the lock. This is what is happening now in the system. Key is not found. B tries to update the system as well. Key is not found. And so usually I would expect that, hey, there's a damage going to happen, but in this case it was further unique. What was happening is that even A couldn't find the lock afterwards. So we thought it would be a software bug. Check the code, didn't look like, because we ran the smoke test, everything worked fine. Could just figure out. And as developers, works for me. It was working on my computer, working on a Travis build as well, but only on the production system it wasn't working. Run it, acquires a lock, fails, B does it, fails, goes on and on. Anybody wants to guess what could be happening? You know, the most interesting part is at the bottom of these RCA, they're very simple and stupid things. You know, when I look back, it's like, oh, this was just like a 5-second thing. Anyway, so what could be wrong here? Like, anybody wants to take a guess? Anyway, our diagnosis and solution. We went in, we ran through all HCD logs as well. I raised a ticket as well, and I said that, hey, HCD has a bug, and TTL is expiring too soon, and it has something to do with HCD election. You know, because when I've not written the software, all those logs look gibberish to me. And like, I see some election happening, this has to be it. And my solution was we replaced HCD with console. And we thought this problem will go away. But actually the root cause was the clock was off. NTP wasn't syncing on the cluster. On HCD, what happens is that only the leader has the lock information. They've changed this behavior now. This was after that I'd actually raised this issue, and it was a GitHub conversation. It went on for a while with the guys as well. So if the clock is not synced, the new leader actually eradicates the early keys, evicts the keys. And because of which, of the clock sync issue, what would happen is that it would just evict all keys, and the next guy, and the same process would not find the key, and nobody else would as well. So again, I mean, what's the real reason behind this? You know, like, this is what is the reason behind this particular problem. But what's the actual problem here? The actual problem is that when I look back at this RCA, and what did I learn from it? Never after that, even from the starting of a machine. So, you know, what we usually do is that we start a machine. What we do is we run Ansible on it, we run configuration managers, and we do all of this. What I realized that day was that, so actually that NTP wasn't syncing because of a further problem, because there was so we were in an air-gapped environment, and the NTP was not reachable from one of the machines. So what we ended up doing was, so google.com, when you hit, it actually returns a timestamp in the header. So we started making curl calls via proxy and actually setting it on the machine, because, I mean, there was no other choice that we had. So the fix was something else. So the real thing here is that even the start of a machine, you know, like right from the moment go, we started ensuring that everything looks exactly the same. Again, I'm going back to homogeneity here, because ensuring homogeneity is really tough. Now, and the other part is that most of these failures are just first principles when you go down to the bottom of it. You know, these aren't complicated problems. I didn't have to be an HCD expert to actually fix this issue. I mean, of course, to debug it, I had to be an HCD expert, but the real fix was nothing to do with HCD. You know, most of these softwares, they are all working fine. They are going to work fine. What is going to fail is somewhere where I was stupid, or something that I could not actually ensure to begin with. Outage number 5. Actually, I wanted to discuss about the GitHub. Yeah, please go on. Right.
Because that is not always true, and when you have multiple machines in your distributed environment,
right,
and machines are coming in and going out,
right,
there is a very high likely chance that they might not be homogeneous, and which should be ideally okay. It's just that the communication between nodes have to be tested, and
so this communication probably wouldn't have actually worked. So, which is why I'm actually taking a flavors of failure here. You know, like, it's not one. You want one less. When you're debugging a system, what you want is, I want one less problem. You know, like, if you went in and say, okay, CPU also looks different, RAM also looks different, operating system also looks different, language also looks different, what would your life be? And
it's going to be hell, but that's how
hell looks like. No, go on, complete it.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, like, it's okay to make life simple, but that's not how real distributed system or world would look like. Actually, even if we compare peoples, and peoples are nodes.
Right.
You and me are not same. We both are different, but we are able to communicate properly.
Right.
So it's more about how you communicate and make sure that your communication mechanisms are well tested and they have a contract, and that contract is not breached.
I'll come on to that part.
Okay.
I'll cover that part. But I have your question. I'll answer that for you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. But you don't get to ask at the end.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. So, outage number 5. You know, like, A lot of times, what I hear from people is, there's a failure, let's roll back. Standard practice, like most of the times when I've delivered solutions as well, the first thing that people ask me is, can this roll back? Like, and this is why I want to actually cover this. And actually wanted to cover the GitHub outage here, but I wasn't a part of it, so I thought it would be unfair to just narrate a tale. I probably thought I should give you a real world sample of what I have actually faced. Now, this was a startup that I did long time back, 2010 till 2014, and probably this would have been one of my first major outages or failure that I ever experienced. Pager goes off, and this pager is not pager duty. This is actually a real mobile, like things that we would hardwire ourselves, like, okay, send me an alert. A CPU goes on to 100%. Not one, almost all servers are reporting 100%. First when a pager comes and says CPU 100%, my first reaction is, somebody must be doing something. Like, never take CPU seriously. Like, yeah, in fact, I'm glad that somebody is using it. Otherwise, there was no traffic on the website. So now, what was happening is, daemon was crashing. Daemon would crash, and obviously, like dirt simple stuff, you would add it to a init.d script back then and say that if this crashes, bring it up again. So that's standard loop, all is happening. Daemon restarts, repeat. Check, there's no new code, there's no new binary, there's nothing to roll back. So the first thing, when people say that, oh, rollback, so this cannot be solved by rollback because there's no rollback to be done here. So what could be going on? I thought, oh, maybe it's a DDoS, I was happy. It's like, oh, my website is getting a DDoS. It wasn't that. So I thought maybe it's just 500s. That wasn't it. Logs actually started showing a search query, which was basically taking too long to process. Now, I could not shut down the traffic because there was live traffic going on as well. And at the same time, we had actually launched with a new instructor. And there was a live, so it used to be a live session where somebody would teach and people would ask questions, etc. Run-of-the-mill education website. And we could not obviously shut it down. And all our only option was to basically just watch it. Current active users were more than 10,000, so obviously I couldn't have taken it down at that point of time. I wanted to, and this was before microservices existed. Like they were beautifully crafted monoliths talking to each other. Because back then I didn't know the concept of this. You could actually just take this function and deploy it as a service. That has its own challenges as well, but this was much simpler than that. And so just a bunch of few processes trying to coordinate with each other and pretty much the same code. So what that means is to fix one code, I'll actually have to take down everything. And what do I do next? 2 hours later, what we realized was that there was bad data coming in. So what we used to do was we used to scrape tweets, and we would also send in as update which is happening on the same time, so that it gives a nice dashboard of what people are talking about you. And so these upstream tweets. And I think there was a for loop mistake there. So what happened was that instead of 10,000 tweets, we started ingesting 1 lakh tweets over and over and over and over. So when you are searching, now suddenly the data to be searched was massive. What would have looked like 40,000 now was actually 1 lakh multiplied by multiple times. There was no stop button because this was all automated. This wasn't manually done. And why I want to discuss this failure is, a lot of times when we talk about rollbacks in our deployments, in our failure, we said that it's fine, like we'll do a canary deployment, we'll do a red-green. If it doesn't work, we'll move back to a state. What about data? Data cannot be rolled back, right? Now think about this state. I could have rolled back the database to a snapshot because we were taking snapshots. But if I would have done that, what it would mean is that all transactions that happened in a database would also get rolled back. So what that means is that if somebody had paid, that invoice would get rolled back. If there were other sessions happening, they would have rolled back. So rollback is not as easy as you say that just roll back, because code is a function of the data as well, and both alike. So if I roll back one thing, how would the code behave? The code would not behave well. So how do I fix this? Well, there was nothing that I could fix. All what we had to do was wait for 2 hours. Servers crashed by themselves, and well, it went down. We sent out a nice pretty message out there, manually cleaned all those data items in the database, which were actually causing this to happen. Gave a pretty message and apology to the users that, look, we had this mistake, we couldn't do anything because there were other instructors who were going live as well. and we fixed it. Now when you come back at it, what's the real root cause here? How would you actually avoid this? Like, is it a culture thing? Is it a process thing? Like, one can take a tall claim here and say that, hey, your CI, CD and testing is not working well. But it's not this, it's much larger than that. Now when I look back, and since then I actually made it a practice, and this is a leaf that I learned from this Linux command called xargs. So, how many of you have used xargs with parallelism? There's one guy. Oh, I taught you how to use it. So, who else? Okay, one more guy. That doesn't look like, yeah, so cool. So xargs, when you write a Linux pipeline, small, you do a cat and you pipe it xargs. Do you guys know that it can actually be parallelized? And the only way to do that is when the process runs, it's happening one by one, right? Send a sig user 1 to it, and it increases the parallelism. Send a sig user 2 to it, it will drop down the parallelism. So xargs is running, you keep sending sig user 1, it increases the number of parallel processes that it runs. Keep sending seg user 2, it will actually drop it. These are control mechanisms which have been baked into these commands forever and ever, since 70s and 80s, and we don't do this. How many of you actually handle os.signal in your code? Do you guys do that? Few of them. Rest of you should do it. This is how you help it. Because when there's a process running out there, restart is not always going to be a solution. You need control mechanisms. I mean, operating system has given you those signals. Use them. Since then, I made it a habit that if I'm writing a code, at least I should start capturing signals and leave a few signals for my own interaction with the processes. Now, when I look back at it, I mean, obviously, just sending a signal would not have solved it, but an ability to interact with a live process and send it some interrupts where it does something like, hey, don't process that aspect of data. Keep serving HTTP, but the background search, maybe if I could have killed that feature, it would have saved my at least live traffic. So, another learning from there. Outage 6, multiple dispatchers in a queue and a missing resource lock. Sounds like a very interesting problem, right? These are actually humans I'm talking about. So there's a work list that they come with. Multiple people could actually read tasks from there and go about and do a deployment. Now, this is an interesting one. So what happened was I was running a site reliability team, and what would happen was that the team was it had a bunch of young people as well in it, and what would mean is, this is actually very interesting about running systems at scale. A lot of times what we think is that, all this site reliability engineering that we guys do is fairly easy. You can actually have tools which will solve the problem for you. But what happens is that experience is something that you cannot actually give to people. Like having run systems over in a production environment for a decade, etc. Those failures is what they teach you. I'll actually cover that part. Just wanted to bring this out right now. So what was happening here was, there would be deployments that would be carried out. And it was fairly simple process. A deployment ticket would come in, people would send a deployment. Now, what was happening is people would send a deployment, and sometimes they would not check, sometimes they would not validate, sometimes they would not see whether the time is right to deploy or not. These are heuristics. So the other day I was speaking with somebody, and I said, how do you teach heuristics to somebody? Write an algorithm. I said, okay, write an algorithm to catch a ball. Can anybody write an algorithm to catch a ball? You can't, right? Like, the answer would be like, what would that algorithm look like? See the ball, catch it. You're like, there's nothing else you can teach here. But interestingly, what's going on is there's a bunch of heuristics. What you're doing is, as human, you're actually keeping an eye on the ball constantly. It requires 2 motor skills. One, keeping constant vision with the target. Another motor skill that you require is hand-eye coordination. And these are 2 important things that they can't be taught. They are only learned as humans over time. And which is why most of these robotic arms can't catch a ball till date. Because, some of them, and also in real world, it's never a perfect parabola. There's going to be gravity, there's going to be air, there's going to be 100 other things. You can never predict the path of a ball as well in a real environment. You can do it in a simulation. So similar thing was happening here as well, and our solution was, we'll create a deployment checklist. And like deployment checklist meant that people had to sign off that, okay, I see this is working, this is working, this is working, and yet it wasn't happening. So Aditya, my friend, he's here, and we were in a cab ride to Bombay, and we were frustrated with this. You know, like how can this same problem happen every single week? Every single week, same problem, a flavor of it. The root cause was somebody did not check. I said, okay, we need to look back at our distributed system principle. What's the way that processes solve it? Locks. Let's introduce a lock. What would a lock look like in this case? We actually introduced two-factor authentication on every single deployment script. So what that meant was we actually wrote a library, and we were using Nomad back then. So to run a Nomad command, we wrote a proxy in the front, which would require a two-factor authentication. This could not have been a password. Why? Because passwords are shared in every organization. This had to be something which was always, somebody had to deploy, it would either buzz him or me. You know, when we pull out the phone, we send out a 2FA token, and next time when said, who did this? Obviously I did it, because the 2FA had to be me. So next time when somebody was going to deploy, the system would halt, give me a two-factor token. The two-factor token I'll pull out of my phone. If I wasn't available, then it would not happen. I mean, we made this distributed as well. What we did was we actually created a bunch of these two-factor tokens, and they were with the stakeholders. You know, any one of us could give that two-factor token. We made this further complicated as well, that you required at least two two-factor tokens and not one as a concatenation. You know, like this process keeps on scaling. But a lesson of distributed lock we could actually introduce in a real environment as well, because technology only mimic what human coordination looks like. You know, like usually we learn from human ways and actually implement in technology. This was the first time I did the other way around as well. I learned from a system and actually, for a lack of a better word, hacked a human process around it. And yeah, suddenly, I mean, after this was done, our outages actually considerably went down. We went from probably a single line to double line in almost a matter of a few hours. Outage number 7. This is the one that you're going to face tomorrow. And, you know, like I love Fordism, or what all Henry Ford has to say, and this is one of his favorite sayings. The only real mistake is the one from which we learn nothing. And coming back to it, you know, like why are we talking about this? The reason why we're talking about this is when you look at these systems, you know, like you study, when you look at distributed system, we all of us assume that, oh, this is very complicated. You know, like we all say that CAP theorem says, hence this cannot fail. And somebody will say like, oh, but CAP theorem fails, so PACELC theorem says, and hence it cannot fail. I get this is theoretical. And I'm coming back to the question that you actually asked me. Empirical is always going to be greater than theoretical. When somebody tells me that, hey, this system is more reliable, well, nobody wrote a software to be unreliable to begin with. You know, like if you look at 2018's GitHub outage as well, it's not that MySQL had a fault. That the solution is that replace MySQL with a NoSQL database. That's not the answer. You know, that's the usual path that we take. Hey, like what I did, you know, etcd is a failure, so use console. AWS is a failure, so use Azure. I mean, these are not answers. Any empirical observation of any running system requires it to be learned over a fair amount of time. You need to run a system in production for a fairly large amount of time to be able to learn from it. Now, all these failures, I would have not learned. I mean, there's nothing wrong with languages or frameworks. Everything that was wrong was those 4 things. Network, always going to fail. I mean, there's no way you can make communication homogeneous. I mean, you would expect it to be homogeneous, but that's your software that is homogeneous. The topology is not homogeneous. And your software was obviously tested. And if it wasn't, it's easy to catch it. What you can't catch is how is this network going to partition later. Because that is something that is fairly difficult to catch as well. And this post-mortem culture also is something that we need to alter about our behavior of how we approach RCAs. You know, when a lot of this time when I throw these RCAs to people, and this is actually one of my recent favorite hobbies. I carry a lot of RCAs in my bag as well, because it's, and my phone, because it's fun to read how can I learn from others' mistakes, and not about a software, but about policies, about processes, about culture changes that they made, because most of these are going to happen in some way or the other. You can't avoid this. So, yeah, this is just a point I wanted to make. Empirical observation and data that you actually observe for a large amount of time is what is going to trump any theoretical proof of a system being stable. That's it. Yeah, that's me, Piyush Verma. Open to questions.
When talking about network failures, how do you think chaos testing would actually help?
Chaos testing is going to work in a network that you created. It's not going to happen for the network that is running out there. Like, let me ask you a question. You are running an AWS machine, right? You are testing network partition. Let's go through a checklist. What all will we test? Altering a security group?
Yes.
Altering a NACL rule? Anything else?
Route tables.
Route tables? Anything else?
I could get my. There's a lot of networks related stuff, but what we have done for the exact same use case you were talking about, right? This was way before we were on. This was in Starbucks.
Right.
We actually introduced an entire infrastructure that we could actually start tweaking at the network layer, and we've increased the latency at some times. We've caused manual failures, and we had someone from Netflix actually help us to do this.
Right.
And most of the problems that you talk about will be caught at that point of time.
Agreed.
And usually when these network partitions happen, the kind of infrastructure you use, essentially something like if you're already distributed, right?
Right.
So you don't want to write them
Correct.
manually.
Correct.
You end up using systems like Cassandra, for example, for your database, or use Paxos.
Right.
Things along these lines. So I think it's about testing them. It's about knowing that these exist. You have a wonderful point, by the way. But that said, I think there are certain other things that we could also do to help.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought
the purpose of this talk is not to tell you don't do testing, don't do chaos engineering, because those are going to happen. Actually, to the same point, let me add a point to that. Did you? So actually, this is a recent failure that I ran into, and fresh off the boat. Do you know there's a thing called enhanced networking? Enhanced networking.
No.
Oh, so there are certain type of machines which have a higher throughput on their network card, right? So the elastic network interface that you get, there's an elastic network adapter also. Now, ENAs can actually give you better throughput on a network, on a particular AWS instance that you're using. Now, certain instances, like I think the C5 instances, the and I instances, and a couple of other families of these instances will always provide better network throughput. What I mean by better network throughput is the existing NICs, I think, give you around 2 Gbps of throughput, and these enhanced devices can upscale beyond 5 as well. I may be wrong in these numbers, but I think that's what's happening. Now, any amount of my chaos engineering that I'm doing is also going to assume all of this, right? Now, when I'm testing, will I be able to create a perfect simulated environment where what I'm saying is, yes, I was able to max this throughput as well. At the same time, I was able to also test it on that same device. You know, these cases are plenty and hundreds and thousands. And there is never going to be a scenario where you actually can say that this software is going to work forever and ever.
Fair point. The point that I was trying to make was, towards the end, if you could have spoken a bit more about chaos or...
I actually wanted to, ran out of time.
All right.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.